On today's Transport Evolved, Tesla completes its coast-to-coast trip in under 4 days. Nissan gets customer feedback on a potential 150-mile Leaf. Brammo comes to the UK. BMW says public chargers aren't important to EV adoption. And why dogs love plugins. Coming up next on Transport Evolved. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to episode number 185 of Transport Evolved, recorded on Sunday, February 2nd, 2014. My name is Nikki Gordon-Bloomfield.
And I'm Mark Chatterley. How are you today, Nikki?
I'm fine. Do you like the new glasses?
They are lovely glasses. I think they make you look younger. They make you look like a teenage geek, I've decided.
I don't know if that's good or not. Considering my son is a teenager next year, I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But anyway, let's get on with the show. We've had a busy week this week, haven't we, Mark?
We have. I've been driving the Model S, and you have as well. But I've been driving the Model S.
The Tesla Model S. What a car. We'll come to that later on in the show. We're not going to spoil our charged up because you came to my house today to pick up the footage for that, which was like a quarter of a terabyte.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there
quite a lot of stuff.
Footage. And that wasn't all of it, because I've added to that since, because I had footage of my own.
Well, our guests are a bit under the gun today, so let's go and introduce them to the show. First up is Head of Sustainability at Waitrose supermarket chain in the UK. But he's here today in his capacity as an EV person, because he's driven 500 miles in a Nissan Leaf in one day. As part of a challenge to do with his job. But since then, I think he's got the EV bug. He's a geologist by training, which I didn't know until this afternoon, which I think is fantastic. I love getting guests on the show who have completely differing qualifications to what their job actually now entails. I love it. Please welcome to the show, Quentin Clark, who's also a biker, aren't you, Quentin?
I am, yes. I've got a Honda 1000, which I use all the time in and out of London.
Is that fantastic. A CBR 1000?
Yeah, CBR. CBF.
CBF. Lovely bike. Lovely
GT.
bike. And we've been talking, before the show about getting you on an electric motorbike, and we've got an electric motorbike in one of the stories today. So this will be your chance to shine. This will be your chance to shine. Also joining us, a regular on the show who's kindly joining us before he heads off to yet another auto show, I think, or a drive event or something or other. He's not a biker. His brother is. He prefers things on four wheels. Mr. John Voelcker, welcome back to the show.
Thanks very much. Lovely to be here.
Yeah, you're not a biker, are you? You prefer four wheels on the ground.
I'm not. There's this bit in me that says if it can't stand up without support, I'm not sure I want to drive it.
Even though maybe physics is not necessarily the helpful thing because we over-rely on it sometimes and it proves us wrong. No comment. Right.
No comment.
So we're coming up on the show today. We've got some great news from Tesla. Now, if you watched the show last week, you know that there was a father-daughter team that completed the coast-to-coast Tesla run in a Tesla Model S in their own time. And it took about a week, didn't it, Mark? 5 days, something like that?
Yeah, but they weren't rushing this. They were taking it as kind of the more traditional road trip. It's for the journey. They were bonding.
Yes, and yet today there was arrived in New York City a Tesla Model S duo with, I think, 2 drivers each. So they kind of tag team drove all the way from Los Angeles to New York in the fastest possible time, essentially driving, charging. And I assume while one person was driving, the other person slept, which frankly is my idea of hell. Because I like to have a nice warm bed at the end of the day. So nobody's ever going to get me to do a drive like this. But they did it in 76 hours. LA to New York over some pretty horrible weather on the way, John.
Indeed. And that's, I assume that since this was heavily promoted by Tesla itself, they were more or less keeping to the speed limits. I've done the cross-country trip in rather fewer hours decades ago in a combustion engine car, but I think they had to stay sort of legal.
It's not a particularly nice attempt to have to do, though. It's to make that trip in. I suppose it's one of those things where you have to do it. When you do it, you have to do it quickly if you have to do it. But I prefer road trips to be about the trip rather than the destination. And
I'm sure what they discovered, if they hadn't already known, is that there are very, very lengthy stretches of America that have absolutely flat interstates and essentially nothing changing for 100, 200, 300 miles.
Yeah.
Cornfields.
Yeah. And they went through some really nasty weather, I think, in, I want to say Colorado. They hit a really nasty snowstorm, which I think is on the way to the East Coast as we speak. Yeah. But they took a little bit longer than I think they'd initially planned. But this is essentially Elon Musk, CEO of Tesla Motors, going, no, we can do it as fast as we want to.
Well, and I was thinking about this because Elon's been saying for a year or more that he planned to take his 5 kids in a Model S and cross the country. But it struck me that by putting the publicity on this, it's probably a good thing for his kids to take the publicity a little bit off Elon. Yes. When he does his, which is supposed to be during the kids' school vacation. If a number of people have racked up these cross-country trips, he's still CEO of Tesla, so he'll get a lot of press. But, I don't know if I want to be any of the 5 kids who are getting press ganged with, TV cameras at every stop.
Yes, and I think you're probably right with that. And Quinton, you've done a 500 miles in a day trip. What are these people going to have? What would they have been subjected to?
Well, that all depends. I mean, it's a slightly different experience, I would think, in a Tesla, but a similar experience. Really, it's about going from charge point to charge point, varying degrees of anxiety as you approach that, varying degrees of timing to charge and things like that. Lots of coffee. I'm guessing they drank a lot of coffee. But I mean, these road trips, they're fantastic, I think, because, they're serving a really big purpose, in my view, because it's just kind of socializing the whole idea about EV ownership. And, one of the big concerns that people have got is this range anxiety. But, here's people going across the states. Here's people in this country, rocking around up to Edinburgh and back on a regular basis now. Sort of really breaking that mold, I think, is really important work, actually.
You see, I come in a slightly different take. I've done long distance EV trips. John, when I was working with you at Green Car Reports, I did a 500-mile trip, but I split it over 2 days. And this was back in 2011 when the rapid charge network really was in its fledgling state. But as Mark and I discovered on Friday evening, coming back from London when we dropped the Tesla Model S off that we'd borrowed, it took us about 110 minutes, Mark, from your house in Gloucestershire to the Tesla store in London. And it was about 2 hours. Yeah. Coming back, it took almost sort of 2.5 times that length. Not because of the charging problems. The weather was the major issue because the weather was terrible, but also because the weather was terrible, it was torrential rain, it was cold. We couldn't drive at 70 miles an hour with the heating on as you could in the Tesla because the Leaf doesn't have that range. So it kind of reinforces that really, while long distance trips are great for EV publicity, the run-of-the-mill person, and I'm going to get so many people being horrible to me about this, the run-of-the-mill person, the average Leaf buyer, is not voluntarily, at this time, going to want to make a long-distance trip, whether they're in a Chevy Spark, whether they're in a Nissan Leaf, whether they're in anything else.
Could I suggest a slight reframing of this, though?
Go on, John.
I think you're all right in that, all this publicity about Teslas crossing the country is going to help sort of assuage I would never, ever buy one in a million years because they, run out of range in 30 miles kind of thing. Your point about your trip that you made has to do with today's generation of cars. And I don't want to preempt a story you've got coming up. But, I've been saying for a couple of years, if you look at, we've got, I think, 15 or 16 plug-in cars on the market in the States now with electric ranges from 11 to 265 miles. But of those 16, 15 of them are from 11 to 102 miles. And then there's this huge gap.
Yes.
And then you get the two Teslas at 208, 265.
Yes.
I think that there's some number in there. And Nikki, you actually wrote about this a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
There's some number in there of miles. It's three figures. It's 150, maybe 125. I don't know, somewhere in there, where people are going to stop worrying about range anxiety.
Yes.
And that's the next generation of cars.
Yeah.
Because I really don't, I think that as battery prices come down, if we can expect that 5 years from now, today's Leaf with a 75 mile range will have 120 mile range, same price. Yeah. Then all of a sudden, that sort of thing goes away. And with more DC quick charging out there, if you want to do this, it is possible. And that takes away the anxiety point. But you're right. Most people don't actually do that. Most people drive less than 40 miles a day.
Yeah, I think it's all about, how many cars have you actually got? Because if you're going to be running two cars, then actually even now with that 75 mile rate, your second car can be an EV and it's just easy, cheap motoring. Keep your diesel for the longer trips if you still need that. But
sorry, I was going to say the really funny thing is, speaking as someone with two cars, our Leaf has become our long distance car. But most people won't. Most people won't yet.
Well, there's two things. Number one, the newest car always gets the most miles. And number two, electric is obviously nicer to travel in than combustion.
Yes.
I did want to throw in a sort of a cultural note there. The difference between our two countries matters. The average household in the US, the average household has 2.4 cars or vehicles. The average affluent household has 3 point something. So it's much more practical than in the UK or Europe, where the average household vehicle ownership is much closer to one. And given the number of people without cars, it may even be below.
Yeah.
Well, I think. Sorry, Nikki. I mean, I think there's another point as well. It's all about commute distance. Because we got people who drive in, let's say, 40 miles. Actually, 40 miles. You sit at your desk all day. Actually, you're just either charging at work or doing something. Charging it up. By the time you go home, you got your miles back on. Actually, you've just travelled for nothing, and your commute doesn't cost you any money. So that's another point-to-point application. It's really important, I think.
Let's move on to the next story, because this is related slightly. Elon Musk was talking in Berlin this week. Was either Berlin or Munich? I can't remember. I know it's Munich. At a kind of a town hall meeting. He really does get a lot of love from the Germans at these town hall style meetings, and they seem to be able to ask him the kind of questions that I suspect the Brits and the Americans would struggle with. But maybe that's just maybe there's just less reins on Elon when he's out of the US. But he was talking about long distance travel, and one person was complaining about the distance between the superchargers, and he did say, look, once we've built a network, we'll essentially fill in the gaps. So at the moment, these supercharger networks are at the limit of, say, what the Tesla 85 kilowatt hour battery pack car can do. But eventually we'll change that so that it will be achievable with 60 kilowatt hour cars, and much, much better. But also at this conference in Germany this week, or at this town hall meeting, as he called it, Musk said that the third generation Model E, he didn't call it the Model E, but he has in the past, the third generation Tesla will have supercharger capability. And this is the important thing. It will be free, just like it is for the S and the X. It's a reiteration. It's not a new piece of news, but it's nice to know that Tesla is still planning on doing that, still planning on making superchargers free for life of the car. John, there is a lot of people in the automotive industry who are very dubious that Tesla can actually pull this off. I've seen some really quite acidic pieces on automotive news recently from industry insiders saying there's no way that Tesla can afford to do this forever.
Well, there are sort of two issues there. One's cultural, one's financial. On Green Car Reports, we really don't look at the financials of the company. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of other outlets that do that. So I'm not in a position to judge whether Tesla is a going long-term financial concern, given the huge cost of making cars, introducing new ones, and all the other stuff they've got to do. Some of the criticism that I've seen has been in that vein, and that one I'm just going to opt out of.
Yeah,
but
of course.
It's also important to remember automotive news is based in Detroit. the home of the native U.S. auto industry for 100 plus years. And while the native makers now have a more global perspective, and I'm encouraged by that because any executive at GM, Ford, or Chrysler who's going to get anywhere does at least 2 stints overseas. And this is not, nice cushy duty in Germany. It's going to a developing market like Brazil or going to Korea or China or something like that. So they're more global, but they're still very much in the Midwestern U.S. model of how people use cars. And I think Tesla is so different in some ways, and it basically doesn't care what they think. And that does rather rile them.
Well, this comes into nicely to the next piece of story, and maybe Quentin, I can get you on this one. At the same event, Musk confirmed a deal. Now, this is monumental between German-based Sixt, which I presume is helping take care of the leasing agreements, and Bank 11 in Germany. And this is incredible. Tesla is promising to give customers a personal reimbursement for any costs incurred in switching their electricity providers from standard general mixed grid power supply, so it could be anything from coal to whatever, to 100% renewable energy. Now, here in Europe, that's quite easy to do, less so in the US. But here, I use a 100% renewable energy company. So all the energy I buy, I pay an additional premium, and it's fairly high over the base rate for UK utilities, and they promise to buy in an equivalent amount of renewable energy to the energy I am consuming. And I am quite a high consumer in my house, partly because of the studio here with all the lights and computers and everything, but partly because of the cars as well. But in Germany, Tesla is saying, if you have switched to renewable energy, we will cover the difference between that and what the standard tariff would be in your area. If you have already converted to renewable energy, that doesn't matter. We'll still pay you the difference. So essentially, this is, again, astonishing. And I can see, John, this is news to you, obviously.
I would also view it as a way for Tesla to get attention. The German market is notoriously conservative. And it's not like Germans don't have quite a plethora of fast luxury vehicles from which to choose. Plus, the German automakers have historically been quite skeptical about plug-in cars. And so I would argue that this may be a way for Tesla to key into the very real concern among many German consumers about climate change, which isn't shared in my country as yet, and sort of make a splash by getting the attention of people who would otherwise sort of say, oh, well, that's nice, and then go buy another BMW.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it also offsets the people who say, oh, yes, but electric cars aren't green, right, Quentin?
Yeah, but I mean, that's absolutely right. I mean, this whole thing about being, consistent, actually, you're going to drive a green vehicle, you want to power it with green power. And it's just inconsistent not to do that. But I think you've got to look at your provider, Nikki, because I'm on a green power provider, Ecotricity. It's actually got a price commitment that is slightly under the big six.
Yeah, so, I think mine was a little bit more, and it's probably now dropped under. But I know it was for a while in the past. So I'll have to look at mine. I know I'm not with Ecotricity, I'm with the other one.
But at least it's green. But I mean, it's good stuff. I mean, of course, if you're on the electric highway, then that's Ecotricity, powered by the wind. Yep. It's great. It's a great business model, which works really well.
And I think this is going to be moving forward as more and more people do it. And we've seen in the UK, Ecotricity and Volkswagen are working together. BMW's working with Good Energy Mark.
Good Energy.
Yeah. Which is who I'm with. So, between them, they do kind of, it is slowly happening. So people who are buying EVs are automatically switching over to green energy. But Tesla's promise to essentially underwrite any energy is a clever one. But there is one more thing that I would add and caution here, and that is in Germany, it is in fact now cheaper to generate electricity using photovoltaic solar cells than it is using, and it's one of the only countries in Europe where that is now the case. So it's cheaper in Germany to generate electricity from renewables anyway. So this might be a bit of a headline that makes more of a difference outside of Germany to those of us looking in than it does for those who are in Germany. If you are watching, listening to this show and you know what the comparable prices are, please do get in touch, because I have a suspicion it's not necessarily as big as the headline statement may suggest. Moving on. Nissan North America quietly sent out a questionnaire this week to some of its Leaf drivers, essentially going, if we were, or one of our friends were, to make a 150-mile Nissan Leaf, would you like one? And perhaps, hypothetically speaking, I mean, it might not happen, would you pay extra money for it? And if so, how much would you pay? Now, the interesting points of this is a questionnaire that Nissan sends out. Nissan has made a bit of a reputation of itself in the initial stages for not listening to owners, and then kind of backpedaled quite a bit with its Nissan advisory board, Leaf advisory board, and is now trying very hard to listen to what its owners, existing Leaf owners, want. So this survey didn't go out to all American Leaf owners, but I know it went out to some. And the maximum amount of money that was on the question of, if you want a 150-mile Leaf, how much would you pay extra for it, was only $150. John, that's not very much, is it? Which suggests that Nissan's battery prices really have dropped dramatically.
Indeed. Nissan just delivered its 100,000th Leaf, I don't know, last week or the week before, I forget when. And they are ramping up production. I think 2014 is going to be a very interesting year for electric car volume from Nissan. But they have said routinely, albeit they didn't quite make their schedules, that they expect by 2016 to start hitting a tipping point where an electric car is straight across the board competitive on price and sort of not having to go through the lifetime cost calculations. I think it's eminently possible that you could go from 24 kilowatt hours in a current Leaf to 40 or something like that, maybe 48. Get that range decently up into the hundreds, 120, something like that, and still bring it in the US world for $30,000 base model, or sort of 35 to 38 fully loaded. And that will really change things, because once you get into three figures, then you sort of get if it goes 120 or 140 miles, that's 3/4 of a Tesla for half the price.
And that's where we were talking. I mean, that's exactly what we were talking about earlier, wasn't it? And I think, 150 miles, Mark and I were talking about this on the way back from London. We would go, I think, probably, although I thought the Tesla was a great car, the Tesla Model S has so much power, I don't really need it on a daily basis. And the only real selling point for me in the Tesla is its upgradability remotely and its range. So, if Nissan's coming along and going, exactly, here's a car for a third, a quarter of the price of a Tesla, would you like it? It's got 150 miles range. If that was 150 miles achievable as opposed to EPA, and I think we need to make that differentiation there also, then I would go for it. Quinton, what do you think?
Yeah, it's one of these things you can probably think you can never have too much range, really. But it is a horses for courses thing, because, if you are just going to use it as your second urban vehicle, you can live within the range envelope that's existing now. So you wouldn't want to pay an awful lot more money, but maybe you could pay a little bit as an optional extra. I think the critical thing as well is the frequency of the rapid charging units, because when we were doing our run, you kind of had to stop at every single one because it was 60 odd miles between the chargers and you didn't have enough to get onto the next one. If you could get 2 chargers and leapfrog one, then actually you're going to make much more rapid progress. So, something like 150 would work really well. That would let you do that. Of course, you've got a charging time penalty probably when you're at the other end, but hey, have another cup of coffee,
Well, that charging penalty would be less. The Chatterley starts reducing the power once the car's above about 20% state of charge. Yeah. It's really quick. It starts limiting the power. And I disagree with what you said earlier, Nikki. I think if it was 150 miles EPA, because I think the EPA range is actually achievable by pretty much anyone who sits in a car. Yeah. It's just EPA is sensible driving. And yes, you can get under that by not being sensible, but I always treat the EPA as kind of I can achieve this in my car. Yeah. So if it was 150 miles...
John?
Most people are not the electric car equivalent of hypermilers, and having just lived through a couple of polar vortices, There are large swaths of this country where it stays below 20 degrees Fahrenheit for days and weeks at a time, and people want the same performance as they're going to have with any other car. I agree with your point that you can get EPA range, but most people won't.
Oh, well, I think in the UK, and that's my experience of driving, I mean, I can get the 73 miles of my Leaf in winter without stressing. It seems, at least in the UK climate, then maybe I should phrase that in the UK climate, in my experience, that's an easy thing to get. 65 miles an hour on the motorway. Although maybe you would argue that maybe 65 miles an hour isn't motorway speed.
No.
No.
I mean, you only have to think...
Ours is 75 miles an hour in the parts where it's limited at 65, so...
You have to think, I mean, Mark, you have to remember that, when we were coming back when you were driving from yours up to London in the Tesla Model S, you were driving at maybe slightly over the speed limit.
I would never break the speed limit. Never.
Let's just say you were within the 10% allowable. You were within that 10% allowable figure. But coming back, we sat at 50 miles an hour for the first hour and a half because there were 2 charging stations broken. It was horrible weather, and we couldn't go home. Yeah. So I think what this does point out, though, if we can bring this story to a close, is that Nissan is listening to people. Nissan is accepting that, yes, that the current Leaf is limited for most people. Not necessarily most people need it. Most people think they need it. And it's kind of one of those, okay, if we say we're going to make a 150-mile Leaf and at least we offer it, then when you go to the dealership, you can choose whether you buy the 75-mile Leaf or you buy the 150-mile Leaf. And I think having that choice, as Tesla has proven, Tesla started with the 40 kilowatt hour, 60 kilowatt hour and 85 kilowatt hour, and nobody bought the low range one.
Yeah.
And 2 final points. One is that if you look at the first generation Toyota Prius, it was really sort of a suboptimal car. Too small for this country, remarkably slow, but sort of the demonstration of what was possible. The Gen 2 Prius, introduced for 2004, really kicked it up to a whole new ballgame. And I think we're going to see exactly that same pattern with electric cars from Nissan. Not to mention which, second point is, those used 70-mile Nissans are going to be really inexpensive. And I'm looking forward to that.
That was exactly my point. The second-hand market, at that point when you can buy a 150-mile range or it's optional, and you can look at a second-hand market and go, for 1/8 of the price, I can get a car that can go 70 miles or 60 miles because it's been used. It's incredibly powerful.
It is all about price. Moving on. Oregon-based Brammo Motorcycles has confirmed that it's coming to the UK. Now, this is an interesting story because last year, Zero Motorcycles, who I thought made some really nice bikes, pulled out of the UK completely, citing a lack of incentives from the UK government and just poor sales. Now, there were some other reasons I think that may have impacted on Zero's ability to sell. It sold one of its local dealers was a Land Rover dealer, which wasn't necessarily the first place you'd think of when you go to buy an electric motorcycle. But anyway, the Brammo Inertia and Impulse are coming to the UK. However, without any incentives, unless Brammo happens to put some on. I'm really worried that the bikes, which I'm guessing, I don't have any official figures, but I'm guessing are going to be around the £10,000 mark, are just going to be too expensive for most people. Now, Quinton, let's see if you've got any thoughts on that. Would you want a bike that expensive?
Well, they're a bit of well, for me, the bike is a lifeline to London because actually, driving in an EV car, you're still stuck in the same traffic jam. But a bike, you get through it. So for me, the critical thing is, obviously the price, obviously the performance, although I'm not looking for, wheelie power, all the way down the motorway. This is more about the ability to cut in and out of traffic and probably do things you're not supposed to do, but get there quickly without any problems. So how's that all fit together? It's going to be, can it charge quickly when you get to your destination so you can turn around? Things like that. It's the technical spec that's going to really influence me.
And it's interesting because I think electric motorcycles are now at the point, and this is why I was so disappointed with Zero, because last year's Zero motorcycle range was the first electric motorcycle, the first year it offered electric motorcycles, which I felt gave a comparable performance and reliability to gasoline models. And so they were right at that tipping point of people being able to go, yeah, okay, I'll sell my 500cc Street Fighter and I'm going to go with a Zero S. And I think if Brammo can bring in a bike of that ilk into the UK and have enough publicity and enough incentives, either through rebates, I mean, it has offered rebates in the States recently. Because obviously, John, the federal tax rebate for electric bikes ended, didn't it, at the end of the year?
Yes, I believe the only one that's left, they got renewed for this past year, 2013, and I think also retroactively for 2012 as part of the budget deal, but they expired, and all that's left in this country is the plug-in vehicle purchase tax credit.
And that's a shame. That's a shame. Right. Well, it'd be interesting to see if you are a biker and you live in the UK. Get in touch. If you know anybody who's going to be a Brammo distributor, I think Quinton would like to at least have a ride.
I'll give it a go.
Maybe we'll go out. Maybe we'll get two bikes and go out for a ride. I'm trying to find other
now
bikes
you're
to go out with. Yeah, sounds like fun.
You're talking.
All right,
I'll ride one with little stabilizers on the back, like I used to get on my bikes.
I'll follow in the Tesla.
Yeah, absolutely, with the first aid kit. All right, well, we're coming up to our ad break. For those of you who've seen in the past, what this happens if in the live stream is there will just be a slight pause. If you're watching in the YouTube, please don't skip the ad because it helps bring us income and that helps pay for the things that we need to do to bring this show to you. We'll be right back. Welcome to part two. Fantastic. We've got John Voelcker here and also Quinton Clark and of course Mark and myself. We are steaming through the show notes today, partly because I know John's got to go in 25 minutes. But this is one now we're talking about we've talked about Tesla, we've talked about Nissan in the past segment, and also electric motorbikes. Now we're going to talk about BMW. BMW is really confusing me right now because BMW is bringing out the i3, quietly launched the i3 in Europe to the point of it started deliveries in the UK, and it took us nearly a month to realise that they'd started deliveries in the UK, Mark. And now BMW is saying, we're not going to make any other plug-in cars beyond the i3 and i8 until we know that there is demand. Now, I don't understand this. There are 10,000, I think there were 10,000 orders for the i3. There's a 6-month waiting list, John. I know these are small figures, I know, in the automotive world. And any other type of car, this would be a tiny, tiny proportion of an automaker's overall output. But for BMW, is this a small figure?
Look, this is a story we chose not to cover. I think this whole thing's been a bit blown out of proportion. If you follow the auto companies, one of the lovely things about German car companies is that executives will actually answer your questions as opposed to regurgitating the nearest relevant talking point from the press release with some of the same words in it. So we like that. The downside of this for the companies is that the executives frequently go off and say things that either aren't thought through, don't have the context around them, or may reflect the executive's personal opinion as opposed to company policy.
And you think this
which
is
is
what's
fun
happened?
and makes headlines for folks like us who actually do this for a living. But I'm really not going to put a whole lot of credence in this particular one story based on a couple of sentences from an executive in the scrum at a show, I think.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
I think that's interesting in its own right. And I think I agree with you. I think this is indicative of the fact that as you go higher and higher up in these organizations, that commitment to electric cars and lower emissions cars isn't necessarily reflected in personal opinions, because these people will have worked their way through the motor trade when it was all about horsepower and all about the V8s and the V16s and all those other things that I don't really understand, the things that other people like about cars, unlike me. And they've worked their way up the chain with that ingrained into them, and that's probably being their personal opinion being reinforced by the company they've chosen to work for. And now all of a sudden this switch is happening and hybrids are in and electric cars are coming about. And some of the people don't get it, and they've probably not been involved in the EV projects directly. It's probably in their mind something a small group is doing somewhere to deal with the hippies and the eco people so they can get some sales, and it's not a big thing for them. So he comes out and says these few words, and it becomes the story. And I think it is a story because it shows that these companies, no matter what their PR is saying, aren't totally committed.
Well, that's indicative of any large company. I mean, we've seen this happen with petrol cars as well, with hybrids, with diesel, with you only have to look at, pick any automaker, and there will have been at least some point in the past where somebody said something. I suspect, I think it was Autocar who came out with it originally, or Automotive News, and I can't remember where the original source was. I know I covered it. And I think, John, you are probably right with that. And we know that the i5 is at least being looked at, right?
Right. I would also point out, BMW has spent probably a couple of $1 billion at this point on 5 years worth of plug-in car development. They've got 2 products in the market. They're obviously looking at derivatives of those products because that's how you spread your costs, sell more vehicles, and attempt to make money. They're by far out in front compared to Daimler, which has a fairly incoherent plug-in strategy, if you can even call it that, and Volkswagen, which is viewing plug-in as sort of one in the laundry list of powertrain technologies that includes petrol, diesel, natural gas, yada, yada. BMW have made a very large corporate commitment, and I think what this means is we're going to let these 2 roll out, leave them in the market for a year or 2, see how people actually react to them, who buys them, why, what kinds they buy, etc., and then make decisions about the follow-on models.
And I think we need to also understand that the I brand has always been marketed as the weird, wacky, out there, way clean sheet. We can build a plug-in car that looks like anything we want to. I mean, that's certainly the impression I've got from talking with BMW designers in the past. And let us not forget that BMW is also working on plug-in cars in its main brand as well. So it's not a lack of plug-in cars. But this is the next story that's very interesting. Herbert Diess said this week that public charging stations, he's one of the board members at BMW, public charging stations aren't important to EV adoption, which is true based on the information that was discovered from the BMW Active E and Mini E trials. However, it is not true based on your man and woman in the street who don't know anything about plug-in cars and want to buy them for the first time. Quinton, you're nodding.
No, I am. I think this is really interesting because it's this difference between people who buy a plug-in hybrid, because of the range anxiety concerns, and they just want to be sure they got the backup. Actually, they got really short range, generally speaking. So the battery guy, charge at home, does his work all day long, goes home, charges at night. The plug-in hybrid has to think about charging during the day when they stop more often, because they soon get used to the idea that it's much nicer to drive the car on electric. And actually, hey, wait a minute, I'm talking about 3 or 4 pence a mile instead of 15 odd pence a mile when I've got it running on the gas.
Yeah. And it's funny you should say that, because I rolled up yesterday in a parking lot. I think it's the first time I've ever rolled into a parking lot in town, and there's been another plug-in car opposite me. It was a Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid, and I actually smiled at them as they went past, and they went, "Oh, we should have got one of those because this one's only got a few miles of range." And there's actually that regret.
There's
people
a regret.
who buy the limited range plug-ins. John,
definitely.
Yes, ma'am.
What's your take on this? It's the same as the first one, isn't it? It's opening the mouth.
I think so. Yeah, there's a big asterisk with about 3 paragraphs of context that follow below that, right? We've talked before about the TEPCO paradox, the folks who are better known for Fukushima now, but who did this test with iMEVs, good Lord, 8 years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
What they discovered is if you've got public charging sort of blanketing your usage range, people will drive much closer up to the range limit of their electric car than if you have no public charging at all, where they'll only use about half of it and then return back home because they get anxious. Yeah. But the added miles of travel electrically do not come from those public charging stations, all of them. Some of them do, but not all of them. And so it's a question of sort of giving people confidence that there's an alternative, even if they don't actually use it.
Absolutely. And it's a case in point. I rolled over 50,000 miles yesterday on my Leaf.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And I drove about 100 miles yesterday. I drove, doing the school runs not school runs, but weekend runs in the morning with various kids. Stopped off at a shopping centre in town for an hour, 10 amp charge, so maybe got 5 or 6 miles of range. Stopped at the local IKEA for a 10-minute blast while I ran into the local pet store and got something. Came back home, plugged it in for another 2 hours until it was back to full. Then went for a drive with the kids and the dogs, went out for a walk, and coming back, I stopped again at another quick charger for another 2 or 3 minute blast. Yeah. And it wasn't I could probably have done that all in a single charge, but it was the mentality of, I can just top up for a little bit. I can just keep going. Mark, you're desperate to say something and I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It comes to, I said it last week. It's the difference between what is actually needed and what people perceive is needed. And I said it last week, and it's contentious because it could be seen as a waste of money. But we know from all the studies that have happened, most people charge at home. It's like 98% of people do most of their charging at home. And the public infrastructure isn't used that much as much as it could be, or people perceive it will be. But yet when you ask people what's stopping them buying an electric car, they always say the charging infrastructure. So I've got a wild idea, which is we should just whack in level 2 chargers in America and in the UK, what we'd call type 2 32 amp chargers everywhere, and acknowledge that they will not be used, but their purpose is to give people the safety net they think they need to buy the car. And then in 5-6 years' time, when there's a massive amount of people driving electric because they see they got this buffer even though they don't use it, you then consolidate all of them. So you take the 5 or 6 level 2 chargers that you've got in, say, the centre of Gloucester, and you consolidate the power and you give them a rapid charger, which is far more useful, and we know is far more useful. And by that point, the people driving the cars will know it's far more useful. So the money isn't wasted, but the problem is the media would say it's being wasted because these posts aren't being used. But it would get more people into the cars. Anyway, that's what I think should happen. But
I do foresee a bit of a political challenge with that approach, Mark.
Yeah, I agree. I agree there's a political challenge.
Quentin?
But I mean, I think there's another bit here to this, which is about insurance, because if you're going to charge at home, chances are you're going to be charging at a relatively slow rate. You rock up home, you've got a flat battery, you're not going anywhere soon. Now, what you want to be doing is just keeping your range topped up whenever you can, as we call a hummingbird habit, Yeah, keep it charged, and then you've always got that insurance at home. You can just go out in the evening, you haven't got to worry.
ABC, always be charging.
Always be charging.
That's the result. Okay, Volkswagen Golf. Now, put your hands up if you are a fan of the Volkswagen Golf in its many guises over the years. I'm definitely one. Mark's owned some. John, you're a fan of the Golf
own too.
Now, the Golf is a wonderful car. Volkswagen's whole advertising campaign for many years was it's built like a Golf, or it sounds like a Golf, or it drives like a Golf. And Volkswagen Golf... That door slam, yeah. I owned a Mark II electric City Stromer, which was actually an electric factory conversion of Mark II 1984, 1985 Volkswagen Golf. I'm particularly a fond fan of the Country. There aren't very many still in existence because they were a 4x4 that was only produced in left-hand version, but they kind of lifted up. And I think the Golf Country should be the grandfather of today's modern crossover SUVs. That's as far as I'm concerned, because they're lovely. They were lovely.
Cheap Grand Wagoneer.
Sorry?
Cheap
Of course.
Grand Wagoneer 1962.
You're quite right.
Carry on.
I stand corrected, John. And Land Rover, of course, as well. They had a sport. They had a utility wagon as well. Yeah. So the GTI has always been viewed as Volkswagen's affordable performance Golf. I know there was the R32, and there've been some other performance-oriented Golfs over the years, but the GTI has been the one that you could afford. It was the one that you could afford if you stretched yourself a little bit, and it had fantastic performance. And now Volkswagen is going to add a new name to the performance stable, the Golf GTE. which is the name that Volkswagen is going to give to the Golf plug-in hybrid, which is essentially the same as the Audi e-tron plug-in hybrid. Same performance, same engine, same specs, same everything else. John, is this just a clever marketing ploy, or do you think that the GTE really does deserve the performance-oriented name?
Well, I haven't driven that powertrain yet, but I think it's genius in that it gives you a progression at the top of the range, because this is going to be an expensive Golf.
Yeah, we're going to be 25.
Performance, which at least you're going to get when you hammer it and you get both electric and combustion torque hitting your wheels. But more than that, it gets rid of this annoying 3-word hyphenated suffix that everyone seems to use for lack of anything better.
Yeah.
Ford at least created the Energy sub-brand for its plug-in hybrids, but Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid, Honda Accord plug-in hybrid. I mean, this is better. This brands it. It's easier to say it's its own model. I think it's very clever.
And I love the way that Volkswagen is just treating this just like another car in its lineup. I know that you kind of a little dismissive earlier of its, yes, an electric is just another one of the hybrid drivetrains. But having driven the Volkswagen e-Up last week, Mark and I were really impressed at how the e-Up was designed from the ground up, or the Up was designed from the ground up to offer any number of different drivetrains. And so therefore it drove far better than any number of the converted cars we've driven over the years, which were gasoline cars originally and then converted to electric by some method or other, whether it was at a factory or afterwards. I can't wait to get behind the wheel of this. It's got an 80 kilowatt electric motor in addition to a 1.4 litre petrol engine. So it's going to be quite a performer, I think. And it's got the DSG system, which is a lovely transmission. And it's going to, I think, really because of the name. It's, as you say, John, it's the name. It's also the fact that it's a Golf. People will trust that brand. Simple as that, isn't it?
Agreed. All
right, Tesla P85 Model S is one fast car. We had the P85 Plus this week, didn't we, Mark?
We did.
And 0 to 60 in 4.2 seconds. And I don't think I was ever able to floor it while we had it, because it was wet, without the back end wiggling.
And to be fair, we spent the first 2 days of it, because we took it and it was charged up into range mode, and we just left it in that. And still, it was insane.
Yes. Which I said we weren't going to preempt the charged up, and I'm not going to preempt the charged up. But essentially, it's got more performance than you need, and it's comparable with any other executive car of its class, any other large cars, the S-Class Mercedes-Benz, the 7 Series BMW. It's that same kind of mentality. There is an awful lot of power. It's there when you need it. But there's a US tuning company, John.
Yes.
This is one of Green Car Report's stories. So would you like to tell us about this?
Sure. Saleen is a well-known performance shop in the States, very well respected, been around for a long time. They have done really crazy high-performance cars, Corvettes, things like that. Often they do a bit of restyling, but they're expensive. They're very well engineered. The car makers are comfortable with them because they know they do good work. They're not some, backyard chipping shop. And they have said, right, we're going to turn our attention to the Tesla Model S. Not particularly clear yet exactly what they're going to do or how it will perform. I think unless they do something really radical, like put an even more powerful motor into it, it'll be curious to see the impact on warranty, on battery life, and so on, because I'm going to assume that Tesla, which I know to have a lot of engineers who are really fond of high-performance, very fast cars, I think this is something Tesla could do, but it's certainly a plus for Tesla in that if Saleen, who have a following, a passionate following among wealthy people who want extremely fast versions of production cars.
Yeah.
If Saleen turn their attention to the Model S, that's simply more validation among a crowd that might be tempted to poo-poo it. because it's an all-electric car.
And we're talking track. I mean, they did a really fantastic Corvette a couple of years ago that was a performer. It was essentially a track day car. It wasn't a drive on the road. You could drive it on the road if you wanted to, but really you needed to take it around a track in order to do anything fun with it. And what I'm interested to see, I mean, I'm guessing this is going to be a SEMA unveiling, John. Do they normally unveil cars in SEMA?
Among other places, yeah. It's that's entirely possible. This was a somewhat thin story, but the Saleen name means a lot to a lot of performance car buyers. So I think it's a good one.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens. All right, final story of this segment. Quinton, you'd think California was the car-loving, EV-loving home of the US, but no. Do you know where?
No, where?
Washington State, a little bit further north. Yeah, Washington State, not Washington DC, because Washington DC is not a state. Washington State, in the Pacific Northwest, highest number of Tesla Model S registrations last year, and also, John, the highest number of EV registrations in the union. Is that correct?
Yes. And so there's a couple of things. The Pacific Northwest, which is Oregon and Washington, north of California, have done a number of things right. They've created this electric highway with fast chargers where you really can sort of go from Portland to Seattle in your Nissan Leaf using Chatterley fast charging. They've had community experiments where they sort of put one of every different kind of charger in public parking slots and promote their use. They're very green in general, very outdoorsy, beautiful scenery, concerned about pollution, emissions, things like that. And parts of Washington have extremely cheap electricity because they had massive hydroelectric dams built in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. There are places in the Pacific Northwest where you can get your electricity for 2 or 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Oh, I am so looking forward to it. I really, I would love, we're planning to move to the Pacific Northwest, and I really hope that still remains true when we move there, because I'd like to save lots of money.
Yeah, the dams aren't going anywhere. They're not going to build any new ones, but they're not going anywhere. So check your residential rates.
No sales tax in Washington at all, is it? You do have the $100 EV tax every year, but that's not really going to make a huge difference. And just for argument's sake, John, there are no incentives, are there? No tax rebates for Washington, but the lack of sales tax is actually worth more, isn't it? Than
yes, depending on the cost of the car and so on. It's this is where I put in a small plug for Plug-in America, which has a sort of map that you can click on that shows all the different incentives in each of the 50 states plus the District of Columbia, because they vary enormously. And I'm afraid I just can't keep track of all of them yet.
Well done to Washington. I think that's pretty much all we can say. All right, we're going to have another quick break, and then we're going to have one more story, and then we're going to say goodbye to John. Stay right there. Welcome to part 3. I hope you enjoyed the advert, and I hope you didn't click through it. If you did, we will hunt you down, won't we, Mark?
Virtually, we should virtually talk to you. So
the i3 Rex, the BMW i3 Rex, is not eligible in the state of California for the unlimited white HOV lane access OK stickers. It is, at least we think, going to be eligible for the green HOV lane access stickers, of which there are now there are a limited supply, and the supply obviously is going down quite dramatically because there are other cars like the Honda Accord plug-in hybrid and the Toyota Prius plug-in hybrid and the Chevrolet Volt who are all eligible for that as well. But over in New Jersey, sales tax has been on any i3, whether it's electric or plug-in hybrid. There will be no sales tax levied against the BMW i3, John. This is good news for New Jersey, but how is this possible? It's something to do with the California Air Resources Board having a long arm that stretches all the way over the union. Tell us about that.
I would also point out that BMW of North America has its U.S. headquarters in New Jersey.
Yeah, isn't that strange?
As we have seen in our local news, I don't know if the Chris Christie Bridgegate scandal has made it on. But politics in New Jersey is, like politics in many other state and local places, often susceptible to pointing out the interest of a local business. We'll leave it at that.
That was very nicely put.
There's going to be inconsistent rules all over the country. This is sort of the challenge, I think, for people looking at the U.S. from the outside. We've got 50 states, each of which has its own set of rules for licensing, taxing, registering, and inspecting vehicles. It's quite mad to anybody who lives in the UK, but that's the way it works here. And so you're going to have different rules for all of these things for electric cars and the several varieties therein.
Yeah.
And this is just one of them.
And I should also point out, and Quinton and Mark, I'm going to be in New Jersey next week, actually. And hopefully I will hop over to say hello to Mr. Voelcker over in New York while I'm there. But in New Jersey, it gets pretty cold, doesn't it, John?
It does. And, I still find it interesting that there have been very, very few press drives of the range extended i3. There was the one in, I forget which UK paper, where the guy
Telegraph
actually did have the performance fall off for a bit and then come back. But I'll be curious to see how it works under North American circumstances. I have a sneaky suspicion that the press drives will all be starting in April or May when it's warmed up here.
Yeah. But the point is, obviously, the plug-in hybrid, the Rex version, the range extended electric version, makes more sense for New Jersey because in the winter when it's cold, the i3 does have a liquid thermally managed battery pack, but having that backup petrol engine does mean that should you have to be diverted because of snow or whatever, you can at least make it home. And the cold weather does impact range, and it's been very, very cold there. John, I know you have to go now to catch a train, so thank you very much for joining us today. Where can people find out more about you and read up your daily offerings?
That would be Green Car Reports, www.greencarreports with an S, all one word. We do 1 to 8 stories a day on all forms of green cars, from fuel efficiency through different alternative powertrains, and of course, lots and lots and lots on plugins.
And thank you so much for joining us today, John. I know it's been a...
Thank you. My apologies for having to jump, but I'm having a good, environmentally conscious, multimodal trip back home. I'm driving the car to the train station where it gets parked and then taking a 68-mile train ride.
Well done for you, because I'm terrible. I'm flying all the way over to the US next week to take a part in a conference about reducing our carbon footprint in transport, which seems a little disingenuous, but...
Listen, I could walk for the rest of my life and not offset my own carbon footprint, I'm afraid, with all of these test drives, but that's a different story.
Thank you very much, John. Take care.
Cheers. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on.
Bye.
Right, so, i3 Rex in New Jersey, you do get no sales tax, which is great news. Do you think these kind of incentives would help in the UK? Would you like to not pay sales tax? I think I would not like to. I would like
20%.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I think oh, sorry, you go.
No, I mean, obviously, if you can increase the accessibility of the vehicles financially, then it's going to be good news all round, I would have thought.
Absolutely.
And I mean, these things kind of play into such a big agenda as well. I mean, it's not just car companies, is it? It's electric companies, and the whole thing about balancing the grid and all the rest of the benefits which EV drivership can bring. Actually, other people can put their hand in their pocket a little bit and help here.
Yes, absolutely. Well, we'll see what happens. I mean, we get a fairly good incentive anyway. I think it's just a case of...
I have issues with the current incentive, and I'm sure we've talked about it before, which is that I don't think it works because it doesn't go to us. At no point does that incentive pass through as the consumer's hands. And what is to stop? Fictionally, and I'm sure no manufacturer has done this, but what is to stop them saying, well, in the UK, the Leaf or the i3 or the iMove is £5,000 more expensive than anywhere else in the world, and then just pocketing that money. Yeah. There's no control on that. Whereas if it was what it should be is if it worked like in America, which would be wonderful, if it was a tax incentive, so I just paid $5,000 less tax, which is very simple to do in the UK because mostly your tax is done by the government through a pay-as-you-earn system. your tax code just needs to change by $5,000. That would be a much better incentive
I like that,
than this system where the manufacturers, I'm sure, just put the prices up by $5,000 and pocket it.
And the other thing is, obviously, there's no limit to how many times you can apply for it. So I shouldn't admit this, my household has had £10,000 from the government to buy a plug-in car.
But you say you didn't apply for it. It's not, the consumer doesn't apply for it. It's applied for on your behalf by the manufacturer.
Well,
this
by
is
the dealer.
Exactly what I mean.
By the dealer. Yeah, I guess you're quite right.
Goes through you.
I guess you're right. All right, let's move on. Hawaii has always been known for its love of EVs. I mean, there's always been quite a lot. I mean, they had Better Place there for a while, although obviously now Better Place has gone a bit far south. There's been some issues there getting the charging stations to work. But a new bill passed on Friday, which makes it even easier for EV owners to plug in, because it requires parking lots of more than 100 cars. So companies with parking lots of more than 100 cars in the parking lot must provide EV charging and parking or face a fine. And the fine can be anywhere from $5,000 to $50,000. Now, this means places like supermarkets must, I guess, have to do it. Grocery stores, Quinton. Good idea, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we try and provide them anyway. I mean, to have a penalty for not providing them, obviously that's going to change the way people approach that. But I think it's also about what are you actually going to provide, because you have got that whole 35, rapid charger, 109 amp type charger thing, and where do you provide them?
Yes.
Is it in towards the building? Usually is, because the short cabling runs. Should it be towards the back? We're starting to see these issues now of icing, where you've actually got the charger blocked. So you've got to think about how do you control icing at the same time as installing installing them. So, subsidies.
Yeah. Now, it must be said, obviously, Hawaii's you're not necessarily going to. I would imagine it would be quite difficult to run out of a charge in, say, something like a Nissan Leaf if you're on even on the main islands. But Hawaii, obviously, lots of different islands. And I suspect, in most situations, it's going to be a 110 outlet or maybe a Type 2 or a Level 2 in the States charging station. But talking about icing, Mark, you and I were at we were at Membry Services, weren't we, on Friday evening, and we had to drive, as I say, we stopped at the A34 services, and there's actually, I don't want to make anybody listening jealous, but there's a section of the M4 where it goes, the first two were broken, weren't they? So the one at Reading was broken, and the one in just inside the M25 was broken. So we had to drive about 65 miles to get to the one up the A34, and we stopped there for literally 5 minutes just to give us enough to get to Membry, which is where we wanted to stop. And Membry and the A34 are about sort of 10 miles apart, and then it's another 10 miles on to the next charger from there. And we pulled in, and this guy was pulling in a car, and we beeped and went and pointed at the sign, and we wound down the window, and I can't remember if it was you or I, Mark, but one of us went, "This is an EV, you're going to get a fine." We didn't say, "This is an EV parking space, go away." We just pointed to the sign and went, "You're going to get fined," and they're now enforcing it. And he went, "Oh, okay, thanks," and went away. In the past, when I brought up that subject with people, they just went, "Oh, it's just an EV. Why should you get to park here?" Whereas if you actually say to people, "Look, there's a sign, you're going to get parking enforcement," and I just realised my hand disappears if I go this way. I don't know why. This must be a problem with my video today.
But yeah, those fine signs seem to be working a lot more, and being able to point at a sign, especially in Britain, where we have this inbuilt need to follow rules, to point at a sign and say you're going to get fined. He went away quite happily at that point.
But should we mandate that companies have to install charging, or should we just incentivize them? Is it a carrot or a stick? I mean, this is obviously a stick measure rather than a carrot measure. I quite prefer carrots, to be honest. I mean, Quinton, if every supermarket in the UK had to install charging, you guys would lose some of your competitive advantage, right?
Well, I mean, but actually here, because I think actually what that does is just promote the whole idea of EV ownership, which is what, I'm really keen to see happen. Yeah. So it's back to the earlier discussion. I mean, really, when I was talking about the level of subsidy or incentive or whatever, it was just recognizing the fact that if you put your charger close to the building, you've got short cable runs, it's not cheap, but it's relatively cheap. If you are dealing with a much longer cable run, you've got losses, but you've also got the actual cost of the installation goes up a lot. So, what are you going to incentivize? We need to be thinking about this a little bit more cleverly, I think.
Cool. Makes sense. All right. For EV owners in the US, charging at 110 volts is a bit of a pain in the bum, and it's sometimes the only choice if you're out and about and you need an emergency charge, unless you have one of these hacked charging stations which can do 240 and 110. But now there's a new product from AeroVironment which I think is really, really smart. It's called it's called the Turbo Cord, and it looks lovely. I'm going to show you a picture of this now. Check this out. Oh, that's the wrong button. Maybe it's not. Oh, no, that's the wrong one too. No, go away. Introducing the Turbo Cord. I can't show you because for some reason it's not playing. Let me. I'll show you. Mark, talk about the Turbo Cord.
So my understanding, and I hope this isn't incorrect, is my understanding is it's a cord that can plug into a dumb socket. That's a socket that doesn't have any communication in it that talks to the car and says you can have this much power, I can supply this much power.
And it's a brick and a plug.
It's the brick in the plug. So it's the bricks in the plug. But the wonderful thing about it is that you can then change what information it's sending to the car. So you can tell the car this is a socket that can give you 10 amps at 240 volts, or this plug can only do 12 amps at 110 volts. So it puts the power in your hands to decide what to charge as. And what is particularly, I think, wonderful about this, and I know a lot of people in the UK have been screaming out for something like this, is it not so much it allows you to charge quicker, but it allows you to charge slower. So when you're at home, you could dial down the speed to, if you're, say, want to fill up your car, but only using what your solar panels are generating.
I think that's possible. Yeah, and it's a really nice unit. I mean, other people make them, but I think this is going to have a good market for people. I mean, it just obviously depends whether it's the right price point, which is just under $600, I think, which is still quite expensive. So
and the fact that the communications in the plug means that, whereas with the brick that we have, say, and I think you have in America, there's a bit of live wire that's always live, because it has to be live up until the communications box.
Yes.
So whereas with this, because the communication's in the plug, the wire between the plug and your car is only live when the car is charging. And
the other thing is, obviously there's no weight, because the weight is, because it's actually plugged into the socket, so the weight is on the plug that sits in the socket rather than, dangling on the ground, which we've had problems with both our car charging units doing that. Chattermo, 1000th Chattermo quick charger was installed in Europe this past week. Nissan announced. But look, there's been problems with Chattermo quick charging, so I'm interested to see how many of them are actually reliable. Mark, it's a bit of a horrible thing to say.
Yes, I have issues with Chattermo. From the very beginning, we've seen even the ones that went into the Nissan dealers in the UK, those early ones used to be down all the time. And then they all got upgraded, and the ones that started getting rolled out by the various charging networks weren't particularly reliable, and then they all got replaced. And now we're seeing in Europe, I can't remember the name of the charging network, but they've turned off 75% of their network because the Chattermo isn't reliable enough. It's a worry, and it's a worry because there are now other standards. There's obviously the rapid AC charging, but there's also the CCS standard coming out, and I worry that if Chattermo doesn't sort itself out soon, it's going to fade away into the background.
I'm going to be kind of a bit of a devil's advocate. I'm glad that the Chattermo is there. I think we just need more of them. Essentially, we need better maintenance. More of them and better maintenance. So what you were saying earlier on, Quinton, that you can drive, every 25 miles as a quick charge station as opposed to every 70. Then you've got that facility to do it. And obviously, since you've done that trip, the M4 has now been completely, every rest stop now has, along the M4, now has a charging station. But I'm just going to look now and see how many of them are actually up.
Well, probably definitely 2, 3 or 4 down that I know off the top of my head. 2 near London and the 2 going into Wales.
Yeah.
But there's another point here though, because I mean, if you're on, you're driving along the motorway, you go past your turning. Okay, now you just need to sort of then think about how many miles is it going to be before you get back, or can go forwards to the next charging point. And that's really quite a problem, because if you miss it and you haven't got enough juice, you're just going to run out of power. You just need one a bit nearer.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm just looking now. There's 1, 2, 3, 3. I'm looking now. There are 4 of those M4 corridor charging stations are out of action. 4 along the M4, which is what, 200 and some miles, Mark?
Really?
Yeah, something. I can't remember the exact figure. I even wrote the story on it, but I can't remember the exact figure.
So, and then, and it's disheartening for the people who run the networks, because they are trying really hard to keep those networks up and running. And I know that they're faced with all sorts of problems that we probably don't even know or even understand. But it's just about getting the reliability up so that every place. So if you turn up and there's one down, it's not a problem, because you know that you can go to the next one. But I think that's always going to be a bit of a challenge. Moving on. Mark, how do you want to do this story? Because you pushed it in.
Well, okay.
Should I do it?
I did. I can do it. I can do it. So you will have noticed, hopefully, over the past, since September, me and Nikki made quite a big decision in September. Yeah, Nikki and I, shut up. In September, made quite a big decision. I quit the job I had, and I've got my business that I'm sure some people here will know about. And with Nikki, decided that we were going to expand Transport Evolved and make it bigger. And from that, we launched the website.
Yes, the new website.
And we've been working on that very hard, and it's still improving as we go along. But one of the other things that we've run alongside of it is pushing out more video content.
Yes,
because
our YouTube channel.
And our YouTube channel, which is growing and growing, and we're trying to get up. I mean, this week we've put up 4 or 5 videos. We're doing really well this week, and it's video reviews, video blogs. There's a couple of other shows that we've got in our mind that we want to roll out, but we haven't quite got round to yet. And it's all about bringing you more and better content.
Yes,
and issue with this.
Oh well, okay, carry on.
But the issue with this is that Nikki has got her wonderful studio computer and the one that she's using at the moment, which is taking lots of feeds in and spitting out lots of very high res video, which is amazing.
And I wish that I could show you. I mean, I'm just booting up my iPhone here, which is sometimes used as a roving camera. So I'm going to try and boot that up, and then I can show you the equipment we have here. But the long and the short of it is, Mark doesn't have any studio equipment, do you?
No, I've got my nice high quality mics. I've got my little lapel mic that I wear on charged up videos. I've got this mic here, which is very good, which is I got for my audio business, which I use for this.
And we buy most of our stuff, don't we?
Yeah, so I've got my cameras, I've got my other mics that I use for roving about, various things that we use in my video cameras. But my computer is an 8-year-old iMac, which was never designed for video editing. And when it comes to doing these videos like TEN, our 10-minute show, TEN, when Nikki does it, once she's finished recording and editing, she clicks a button and it's rendered in about 10 minutes. Mm-hmm. When I get to the same point and click the button to say render and export this video, it takes 6 hours. And there's a slight difference between our two computers. So me and Nikki sat down about 2-3 weeks ago and spec'd out a new Hackintosh computer. All of our equipment's Mac based, but Hackintoshes allow you to have a lot more power for a lot less money.
And we should point out that we're doing this partly because we can't afford a professional quality professional Mac, and the new Mac Pro is 3-4 grand.
It's lovely.
It's lovely, and we would love one, but we can't afford it. We have, here in my studio, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of the 5 Macs that I use to do this show are actual Macs, and one is a Hackintosh. And yes, we know that that's a little bit naughty from Apple's perspective, but it's the only way that we can bring the shows to you. The only way we can bring the shows to you. And people say, why don't you just use a PC? Well, because we've invested so much money in software and hardware for the Mac side. To make that switch now would be even more expensive. So we are building another machine, which is a bit like the one I've got down here, which we do the main show on. And Mark and I...
It's not as powerful as that, but it's enough to significantly increase the time and the number of videos we can put out. Because obviously in that 6 hours of rendering, my computer can't do anything else. It just sits there doing its thing, and it takes me out of action for 6 hours. So we spec this up, and we created a nice little Amazon wish list of all the parts.
Should we show everyone the wish list?
We should, which is shrinking. And what I suppose part of this is to say, thank you very much. A couple of you have come in, you've seen the items on this wish list, and you've bought us bits from it. So the processor and the case have been bought. I spent all my Christmas money, which is pretty much all the money I have at the moment, because gave up my job 6 months ago, on bits and pieces. So we've got the motherboard, we've got the memory, and we got the power units.
So we've got these are the 3 things left.
3 things that are left.
3 things that are left.
So this is kind of a call out to people, and I feel really conflicted doing this, but we need help essentially to get this up and running. And the payoff for you is there's another show that I've been talking to Nikki about, which we're going to call
be awesome.
Ep.185. So much like the Minute Physics videos, it's going to take ideas around what is charging, how does charging work, how do electric cars work, and take different subjects and explain them in nice, simple, easy to understand terms in 101 seconds.
Yep. And we're going to be doing that.
It's going to be fun, but lots of editing, which is why we need a machine.
So we've got 2 hard drives left on our list and a graphics card. Everything else has now been purchased.
And is on its way to
We should say that the person who bought the case very kindly for Mark would like to say thank you to them, because it's all anonymous. We don't know who it was. However, we think the person who bought the case may have accidentally sent it to themselves, because about a week ago it said someone's bought the case and it hasn't turned up. So if you are the person who bought the case and it's turned up at your house, don't worry.
We'll figure something out.
We'll figure something out. It's probably also a point for us to talk about the evolution of Transport Evolved. Over the years, we have evolved. You know, you guys have helped out in the past. You've helped build this studio machine that I'm using right now to broadcast the show in HD and all that. The cameras I've bought most of the stuff in the studio, as Mark's bought most of the stuff he needs. But the mixing desk and the main computer were done through donations. And at the moment, Transport Evolved is funded by Adware, isn't it, Mark?
Yes.
Or ads.
So, not
AdWords. Not AdWords. No, AdSense. Yeah. What's the word? AdSense. That's it, on Google. So we have ads on our website. And
ads on our videos on YouTube.
And ads on our videos on YouTube. And what we are going to do in a couple of weeks is we're going to try an experiment, aren't we, Mark?
We are, yes. I'm in 2 minds. It's going to be a wonderful thing to try.
We're going to do an experiment. We're going to turn the ads off, but you guys are going to be expected to do something in return. And if enough of you do the thing that we hope, then the ads stay off. If not, the ads have to come back, because at the end of the day, I've got a family and Mark's got one too. So we have to make sure that we, pay our way and all that. And we've got so many more subscribers this week. So even if you can't donate, and we should do this whole PBS thing, even if you cannot donate to the show financially, just tell people about us, because we almost doubled our subscribers this week, didn't we, Mark?
We did. Oh, we were well over 300. Well, not well. We've passed 300 subscribers.
Well
on
over
YouTube,
300. We're going up on an almost daily basis. The hits on the website are going up, and it's fantastic. And we're not at the point yet where we would be what you would call a traditional break-even point, but we're getting there. So help us, please. Is that enough of our PBS stuff now? I've made everybody feel really nervous.
Yeah, sorry. Yes. I feel very conflicted. It's something that we do think very hard before we do this kind of things, and we need your help.
But thank you. It's appreciated. And finally, because this makes things much nicer, I have a Nissan Leaf, and I have 2 dogs, a Border Collie and a Labrador. Both of them prefer EVs over petrol cars. In fact, my Border Collie famously is always, and I do mean always, sick when he gets in a petrol car, especially if it's driven by my best friend. So Nissan, in Japan, Nissan held this special day for Leaf owners who have dogs. This is just insane, Mark.
That's awesome.
Okay,
That's
Quinton,
awesome.
I don't know if you have a dog.
No, I haven't got a dog.
So these are Japanese leaf owners who just love their leaves and their dogs. And it talks about animal owners who like their leaves because it's nice and quiet and it doesn't scare their dogs. And
Yeah,
the links
no, I get
here
that.
in the
I
show
get-
notes, and it's lovely. And
I get that.
someone on Twitter this week said that their cats prefer the leaf as well. So EVs are good for you, and they're good for your kids, and they're good for your pets too. That really is
There are
it.
some lovely dogs.
That really is it for today's show. Quinton, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
When can people follow you on Twitter or anything? When your
Yeah,
non-work related
yeah.
stuff?
Yeah, Green Crispy. That's me.
Green
Quentin
Crispy.
Clark at Green Crispy.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you, everybody else. Next week is not going to be a live show, is it, Mark?
No, well, probably not.
It might be a you and me
don't-
show. We might do a live you and me show. It won't be up to our
Yes.
usual all singing, all dancing, because I will be in an airport in Washington, DC. And of course, that makes doing a show very difficult when I don't have a studio full of stuff. And Mark, I don't think you don't know how to drive this, do you? So you can't come here and drive it.
No, I do.
Unless you
There
want
are
to do a
buttons
crash
and
course.
switches and
Do you want to do a crash course in the next 24 hours? You can live at mine for 24 hours and learn all the buttons.
I'll pass on the. It's like the Starship Enterprise in that room. I'm quite happy with my computer here.
Well, we might do a Google Hangout anyway, but we'll be back the following week at the usual time of 7 p.m. GMT. You can follow us on YouTube. You can follow us on Twitter. We are at Transport Evolve. And you can email us if you've got any feedback for the show at transportevolved.com. Thank you very much for joining us, folks. And until next time, don't forget to plug in. See you soon. Take care. Bye.